just acknowledge the photographs that you're going to see and one or two videos. I normally do this last, but the way I've arranged the talk, I thought it was better I acknowledge them first. BASF, who produce a lot of the products that you use for using nematodes against pests, have sent me some photographs and videos, and the rest is either my own personal collection or UK, European and USA plant health services. So for the overview of this talk, as I said, I'm going to introduce you to two groups of nematodes, go into their biology and the importance of them. The friends group are used in biological control. You're obviously fairly familiar with those already. So I'll go through the biology and the key factors for the success of them, and then talk about the foes, which you might not be so familiar with. And these foes attack plants, and I shall be talking about how to manage them. And then at the end, I'll be very pleased to answer any questions. So what are nematodes? Well, nematodes have their own phylum, just like arthropods, which includes insects and other animals. Nematodes are so numerous and so distinct that they have their own phylum. You might know them as roundworms or eelworms, but they are the most abundant animals on Earth. Currently, there's about, well, more than 28,000 species of them, of which over half are parasitic. So they have evolved these lifestyles over millions of years. Now, they occupy a diverse range of environments, inside animals and plants. They're found millions of them per handful of soil that you might pick up in the garden. They're found in fresh water and in marine environments. The Natural History Museum actually specialises in marine nematodes, and they are the only organisms which are found in the deepest parts of the oceans. So they are a very, very adaptable group. They're also very important in natural recycling, and are used widely as an indicator of soil health. If the nematode populations are fine, then the soil is normally fine. So what form do they take? Well, I showed you that balloon shape, and I don't know if you can see this cursor, but the size of the ones that we're going to be talking about, this is how a nematode that we're going to talk about would appear, the size of it, if you had a human hair going across the screen. So it gives you some idea of the size. When we come to talk about most of the nematodes, they're going to be this sort of worm-like shape. This is actually called a spiral nematode. It's a plant parasite, but it gives you quite a good view of the cuticle enclosing the fluid filled sac, the coelom, as we would call it. It has a rudimentary mouth part, and these mouth parts differ according to what type the nematode is. And then it has a gut, which, a very, very simple gut, which goes down about, well, all the way round here to the anus. Oops, I've pressed one. All the way round to the anus. And then the reproductive system, here you see an oviduct. This is a female, and this is an oviduct to the reproductive system. Now, some nematodes don't need males. They live and reproduce quite happily parthenogenically without males, but quite a few nematodes do reproduce sexually. Now, the forms that I'm going to be talking about for the entomopathogenic are of this sort of shape, but when we go on to the plant parasites, you'll see that they're adapt, and the nematodes actually become cysts on outside of roots. So they're very, very variable. And this helps the plant parasites to become more resistant against drying out. Because as you can imagine, with a very thin cuticle, that's not at all like you find in insects or mollusks, for example. It's very, very permeable to water and drying out. So they do depend, a lot of the nematodes I'm going to talk about depend on moisture in order to live. So how do they move around? Well, I don't know how many of you can see this balloon, but remember I showed you the balloon, and it has got rudimentary muscles that bend from one side to another. And this actually means that they can bend these from one side to the other, and they move in like a serpentine motion through the medium. Those in the soil, for example, will move along the films of water that you get in soil. And if the water table goes down, then the nematodes will go down. When you're inside an animal or inside a plant, of course, you don't need to worry so much. And so a lot of the forms inside plants and animals are just like this. So we'll talk about nematode friends to start with. And there was a development of interest in nematodes really quite recently, but the first discoveries were made actually in the mid-19th century when nematode parasites were found in slugs. But then nothing more was done till about the 1920s, end of the 1920s, when they were actually found parasitizing insects. But because of the fact that, well, from about the 40s through to the 60s, there were plenty of chemicals and insecticides being used that were very efficient, the case of biological control didn't really come up at all. And it was only with the withdrawal of the insecticides and the development of resistance to insecticides that led to renewed interest in using parasitic nematodes to control insects. And that really started to get going in the 1980s. In nature, these parasites occur at very, very low levels, but the idea was to develop them so they could be used en masse and control insect or slug pests. Now, the key point I want to get over really with entomopathic nematodes is that they have a mutual association with bacteria. And the bacteria are essential for the biological control effect. These bacteria live inside the nematodes, and so they're transported by the nematodes, which go into the insects or slugs. They're transported, but when they're inside, the nematode depends on them to start breaking down the insect's guts and insides so it can feed on it. It's quite a remarkable relationship because there's still studies going on onto this whole nematode bacteria relationship. And it's thought that in fact, one of the first effects is the nematode itself, which actually stops the host's immune system from working perfectly so that the bacteria can start working. So a lot of these associations are very specific, nematode and bacteria together, only sometimes they specialize in particular groups of insects. And these bacteria are so dependent on nematodes that you're very unlikely to find them naturally occurring in the soil. So I've got a picture here. It's actually quite an early picture that was taken in the early 80s, but it's still quite relevant. And this is the gut of a Steinonema, one of the more common entomopathogenic nematodes. And this is the gut here coming down. This is quite close to the head. But inside, alongside the gut, you have these vesicles, and hopefully you can see there's a lot of bacteria in there. Now, some nematodes, particularly the Heterorhabditids genus, which is also used in products that you might use, don't have these vesicles. The bacteria just live directly into the gut. So they just regurgitate them when they're inside the insect pest. So to go through the life cycle, I thought where I'd start would be, say, if you're using the nematodes and you're spraying them onto the soil, what you're actually spraying onto the soil are these juveniles. The nematodes actually go through several juvenile stages before they become adult, just like insects do. They molt their cuticle. And in fact, these infective, we call them infective juveniles, are in fact the third stage juvenile. It's actually wrapped in the skin of the second stage juvenile, and that gives them a bit extra protection when they're going through the soil to find their host. So anyway, they penetrate into the insect host, and they can do this in a variety of ways, but generally it's in any opening that they happen to find. So it can be the mouth, it can be the anus, it can be through spiracles. And they get into the body of the insect. And then, as I've just been describing, the nematodes will produce some sort of response in the insect so that it doesn't activate its immune system. The bacteria come out, it regurgitates the bacteria, and the bacteria start to break down the insect. And so over a few weeks, you'll get the nematodes themselves, which are feeding on this soup, if you like, breeding inside the insects. And there's probably, well, there could be anything from 1, 2, maybe 3 generations inside the insect. And then at some stage, it just becomes so overcrowded that the nematodes have to produce these infective juveniles again. And because normally by that time, the whole insect has broken down, they're able to easily escape into the soil and the whole cycle starts again. When they go out into the big wide world, as it were, they take the bacteria with them in these vesicles or in their gut. And the heterorhabditids normally have the bacteria called photorhabditis, and the Steinonema types normally have the type Xenorhabdus. But as we go into the talk a bit more, you'll see that this isn't always the case. So going on to the research and commercial development, obviously if you've only got a few nematodes in the soil, just a 1 or 2 is not going to be any good at all for exerting biological control. So there's been a lot of work into breeding up these nematodes, and it has taken several years for them, for producers, to create the ideal nematode product for particular pests. So the first thing that's important is that it is a species that occurs in this country, because we don't want an Armageddon where we release a nematode from abroad that kills everything in sight. So it has to be of native origin, and that the toxins that the bacteria produce are safe for the wider environment. So they're investigated for that. They're investigated for how well they can find their hosts. They're investigated over many years for the most efficacious rates and means of application, and for the nematode's ability to tolerate environmental and commercial production factors, which I'll go on to now. This is probably very difficult to get an idea of scale, but if you were to imagine an enormous brewery, these are the sort of enormous vats that the nematodes are developed in. They're in like a soup, which sort of mimics a nematode's in an insect's inside, if you like, and they are bred up in this vast soup. And it's quite technical. There's an awful lot of particular things that have to be done to make sure it's the right environment, that the nematodes keep to the same characteristics while they're being bred, and a lot of other factors as well. So more recent research has found, remember I told you about the serpentine movement, different species have different ways of searching out for their hosts. The Steinonema species, which you find in some products, they actually lie in ambush and then stand up on the end of their tail here. This is the tail end. I don't know if you can see that, but that's the tail end, and they'll stand up on that and sort of spring themselves and ambush mobile prey. The heteroabditids, however, are more slightly larger, but they are what we call cruisers. And so they're much better for sedentary pests, for pests that aren't going anywhere. And that's why vine weevil products started off, certainly, with these cruisers, because they could search out for vine weevil. But as we go on, you'll see it's some of the products have got quite complex recipes now. So products available now may have different species to this, and it may be that other characters in these two groups have been found to be more important. For example, although heteroabditid is a good cruiser, it doesn't really get going until about 12 degrees centigrade in the soil, whereas the Steinonema species, which lie in ambush, they can work at much, much lower temperatures of about 5 degrees in the soil. So this is why commercially there's been a mix-up, if you like, a mixture of these species used for different pests, according to which ones have been used most. So nematodes are affected by a variety of stimuli in the field as well to find their hosts, but this does change with age, and it's quite a complex area that I won't go into tonight. So I thought I'd give some examples of a couple of pests. Vine weevil is perhaps the most common one. Here you've got the adults. On the other side of the screen is the larva. And here on the bigger picture is a larva that's actually been killed by a nematode, and the nematodes are coming out of it. Now, the vine weevil adults are nocturnal, and each weevil can lay hundreds of eggs and can breed for most of the year. The life cycle is then that the larvae develop on roots of plants, but it depends in which environment you're using them. When is the best time to use your nematodes? It depends whether it's under protection, it depends whether it's outside under polythene, and all these things we can talk about during the questions later. But it's best to target, know your pest, and know that most of the vine weevil are going to be in the crown of the plant or along the roots, so to target your spray there. I've talked about temperature. There are adult traps available for controlling the adults, but I would say that these are best supplemented by a lot of other methods, because as you can imagine, with a hard shell like that, it's going to take the nematodes a lot longer to find an opening than it is with a nice fleshy larva. So you can augment that by, say, stealthy post-duct inspections, and I can go into this in a lot more detail during the question time. But the ideal thing with vine weevil is to prevent and then plan your treatments. Now, going on to slugs and snails, these involve a totally different nematode species. The slugs and snails actually house quite a few nematode parasites, but the one that is the most commonly used commercially, developed commercially, is Phasmarhabditid hermaphrodita. Now this can live in the soil. It doesn't have to eat slugs. It doesn't depend on slugs. It can feed on soil bacteria and organic material. And the bacteria that it does contain in it, it doesn't seem to rely on it on a mutual association like the other nematodes we've been talking about. But you will find that some commercial products do include a bacterial population to give the product added oomph, if you like. So I think in a lot of cases, it's best to identify which slugs are causing problems. You need to put the treatment on when it's moist and fairly warm, and they're active on the surface for your best effect. Now, sometimes I get asked, this photograph down the bottom, by the way, is with an infested slug, and you see it's got a really swollen mantle, and that's where all the nematodes are accumulating and reproducing inside the slug. A lot of people ask me about snails, but they tend to live above ground, as you are probably aware, but so the whole environment for a nematode would be a lot drier than it would be for a slug. But recent work from the University of Liverpool has found that, in fact, snails have a mechanism whereby the cells inside their shell can actually encapsulate nematodes that happen to wander in there. So it's adding again to the whole knowledge of how these nematodes and mollusks work. So there are a load of other nematodes that are used for other pests, and I won't go into detail with them all, but you can see that there's quite a variety of different species, different combinations of species that you can get for quite a wide variety of insects now. I would say that the general considerations for integrated management with nematodes are, first of all, to know the biology of your pest, know when it most likely will be occurring in your particular situation, and use a product, if you can, that's been developed for your particular pest. Take care with the application process and the timing, and read the label, because all those directions on the label are there for a reason. And repeat applications, I would consider, are probably always going to be necessary. It's important that the soil plant environment is moist and above the temperatures required for the product, which I've been talking about. Clay soils, they tend not to work in so well, the nematodes, because as you can imagine, it's going to be a much more sticky environment for them than it would be for, say, a sandy soil. And the spray you use, is important to use a coarse nozzle to apply the nematodes. Some people use a very, very fine nozzle, and that's not correct. The nematodes will just stay inside the can because they can't get through the nozzles. So they're best used in an organic situation without any pesticides, and control is invariably short term due to the biological and other environmental factors. So I'm changing now over to nematophores, which is the next part of the talk. So there's an increasing awareness of plant parasitic nematode infestations, and I've mentioned to you before about how some of them have really got adapted to feeding on plants, but increasingly they're being recognised in so-called disease situations that in fact it's not disease at all, it's nematodes. And they've really become to the fore now because of reductions in pesticide use, people using organic farming methods, increased plant susceptibility with people sometimes going back to older varieties, with moisture environments in protected crops. But more importantly, I think, with international trade. These are some of the symptoms, if you like, of nematodes I shall quickly go through. Just to give you sort of an eye view of a plant root here, it's just to give you some of the nematode groups that you might find inside plant roots or inside plant leaves, stem above ground. But the majority of nematode pests do live in the roots. And here you can see some of them are just worm-like, as we were talking about, and just feed on the outside or just inside the root. Others have really got adapted into what we call an endoparasitic habit, and they have changed form completely. They stimulate the production of giant cells inside the roots, and the root starts to form what we call galls sometimes. And then the eggs are protruded outside the nematode in the actual plant material so that the young have a ready source. But those that have become really adapted, the cyst nematodes, protrude out of the root. And this is where they develop a shell. The female, as she matures and then dies, has this very hard, outer shell, and that protects the eggs against desiccation. But it also means, in the case of some nematodes like the potato cyst nematode, that they can release just a few eggs per year for sometimes up to 30 or 40 years, that those eggs will remain viable. So quite amazing, really. This is just another reminder of what the free living form of plant nematodes are like. And I like showing that video anyway. So having looked at the worm-like shape, this here is, if you like, a 3D model of what the root knot or Melodogini species are like. And you can see as it turned round, the whole shape has changed of these nematodes that settle inside the plant. They're just like an egg factory, really. Sorry. And if we look at under the microscope, you can see here of a female feeding on the root, and her eggs are protruding to the outside in like a gelatinous matrix. And these are the sedentary root knot nematodes that are becoming more and more common in horticulture. So, and then the final evolution, if you like, of nematodes is where that female protrudes not only the eggs, but a whole body outside the root. These are potato cyst nematodes. And the female dies, the cyst is left on the root containing the eggs. And when plants are harvested, quite often the cysts are left in the soil ready to infest the next crop. But the plant parasites have a wide range of survival skills. And what I'll just mention here is that this one here, for example, is an example of where this third stage larva again, like we talked about that earlier with the entomopathogenic nematodes, these are actually stem nematodes, the juvenile stages, that as the bulb, a narcissus bulb, has dried, they've actually become sort of frozen in time, if you like, and dried. It's called nematode wool, perhaps for obvious reasons. But they can survive for years like this before the bulbs are planted again. But the main reason, I think, a lot of people talk about climate change for why nematodes are spreading. I think it's increased international trade. And the pressures of international trade are to get plants moving from A to B with as least stoppages for inspection as possible. And nematodes, because they live in the roots or in soil, are unseen quite often. And so they're just transported from one side of the world to the other. Recently, for example, the sort of nematode that are being transported from abroad are in bonsai. There's not so many of those now, but there's quite a lot imported in aquatic plants, for example, inside the roots. and they move across from Singapore all over the world now. So nematodes, I've mentioned that they live in soil, quite a few of them, and soil is another pathway for infestation. And at the ports of entry, there's quite strict regulations, not only for nematodes, but for all sorts of diseases, on minimising the amount of soil we bring in from the country. I've given one or two examples here, like soil on potatoes could move around potato cyst nematode. I think one of the outbreaks in the USA after the war was because of the movement of military vehicles from Europe back to the USA. They blamed Europe for that. But also things like footwear. And this is actually some footwear that was worn on a golf course in Northern Ireland. And then the nematologists that wore them took the residues and found about 30 species of plant parasitic nematodes on them. So it's all forms of material like that is how they're getting spread. So I'll just go through, as time is marching on, I'll just go through a few of the plant parasite pests that you may come across. I'm finding in the last few years that a lot of leaf and bud nematode are becoming quite common because of often quite moist environments, moist and warm environments. And anemones particularly affected, strawberries, also ferns. So if you see these sort of symptoms, which are normally enclosed by the veins in the leaf, that is likely to be nematodes rather than a leaf spot or something like that. So you need to get it checked out if your control methods for diseases aren't working. You also get nematodes affecting bulb, Aphelincoides subtenuous affects bulbs. You get these characteristic dark patches coming up from the side. This used to be quite common and then became quite rare, but now there's more being imported, and so we're seeing it a lot more. Stem nematode has always been a problem in this country, not only on bulbs, but on a variety of vegetables as well. And it's characterized by the rotting tending to start from the top, not at the base, which you get with most diseases. And so this is another thing to look out for. This is the nematode wall. Again, if you see this sort of thing, I would just pop them into a dish of water and then see if you can see the nematodes moving. Stem nematode can also affect potatoes. This is stem nematode, typical V-shaped dark area. And this is tuber rot nematode. Used to be very, very common in the UK, but is now quite rare, although it's quite common in Poland before it joined the common market with them using traditional methods. I don't know what the position is now, but tuber rot nematode is still around. Some of the leaf galls that are formed on ornamental plants, obviously a whole variety of organisms that can form galls, but nematodes can do that as well. The most important nematode group, I think, for you to look out for is really the root knots. And we've gone through how they are sort of a halfway house between a free living form and a cyst form. And here you'll see the juveniles attacking the end of a root here where they want to get in, a lot of competition for that. And then those that's managed to get into the root will start to feed on the root, and the root itself forms like a gall at the end there, hence root knot nematodes. And then on mature plants that have got quite an infestation, you'll see lots of lumps. And I've listed here just some of the nematode, root knot nematodes that have become a problem in recent years on a wide range of crops, turf, ornamentals, and vegetables. especially on potatoes. There's been outbreaks on potatoes. If you peeled the skin back of potatoes and you saw these dots here, which if I had a magnifying glass, you could see there's an egg mass surrounding a female there. But a lot of root knot nematodes occur on a lot of ornamentals that are brought into the UK, especially from abroad. These have come from the Far East, these plants. And again, the root, you can just about see the root knot nematodes on the roots here. I wanted to, before I wrap up, I don't want to go on too long, but there's a lot of comments, isn't there, these days about tree diseases. And I just wanted to show you something that is a problem on trees. It isn't due to diseases, it's due to a nematode. And this was first reared its head in Holland, where a lot of trees were falling over in high winds. And a lot of work was done which traced it back to Melodagani malai. And in fact, this is now spreading because people didn't recognize it for so long. It's now spreading in Europe and the USA, and we know it's present in certain localities in the USA. The tree topples over for no particular reason, and root knot nematodes are found at the base. So there's a lot of control recommendations, but basically it depends on what species you've got. They are active. They generally don't last more than a year if they don't have their particular crop, but a lot of root knot nematodes are non-host specific, so they're very difficult to control. Here's just a life cycle of the potato cyst nematode, which I talked about. I would say that the key to controlling plant parasitic nematodes are prevention and identification. As I say, they're becoming more common. You need certainly microscopes to be able to identify the pests, and so you need to send them. In your case, it would probably be to the RHS down at Wisley. But if you do buy any plants from abroad, or they aren't produced from according to a well-known quality accreditation scheme, I would really advise that you put them into isolation before you put them out into your garden or to other pot plants. So I have more slides, but I think that's my time up. So I'll end there.
Okay, Sue, are you going to, can you stop sharing your screen now? Ah, there you go. Yep. Hello. Right. Phil, all right, I'm asking Phil. Phil, can you unmute yourself? That's it.
I have done.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant.
Sorry. Right. The lady here's been taking about 4 pages of notes so far, so she probably has got some questions. I'll go, rather than everybody typing things in or putting their hands up on the screen like that, I will gradually go round people and ask. All right, go on. So have you got a question, Andrea?
Oh, yeah, in time, yes.
Oh, would you like to lead off with a question? Because you've used nematodes for a long time and you probably have got some questions.
Okay. Well, I found that absolutely fascinating. It was a bit like going back to college. But very, very, very illuminating, I found. I've used nematodes for potatoes, and I always use them for potatoes for many years, and I've also used them for vine weevil. I was very interested in you saying that they are dependent upon moisture and warmth. And I did my homework before I ever sent for them. And I was very particular about that. And if we were not in a sort of moist period and it's sort of baking hot or very, very wet at the moment, our climate, I think. And I was very careful. And if I didn't think it was moist enough, I used a watering can and I watered, for instance, my rows of potatoes or my big geranium pots for vine weevil. And I was interested that you were talking about spraying the nematodes on, and I'm not sure that I don't know how many people have used nematodes, but I found it fascinating to get this little packet through the post that said danger live animals on it, and the postman was a bit dubious about this, but I wasn't, and smiled nicely and took it, and it would be helpful perhaps for some people to know how you actually get this little packet into some sort of form in which to spray it. I never did spray with a sprayer. I always you have to get a concentrate, and then you put a litre of concentrate and however many litres of water and mix it all up with a bamboo cane to swizzle it round. And I always used a watering can myself with a fine rose on it. Whether it was right or not, I don't know. I think everything's right if it works. And so I was fascinated by it. I don't know if people do know what happens when they send for a packet of danger live animals and what comes out of the the actual little parcel. So I don't know, Catherine, if we think would a tally be good to see if anybody has no idea about what you do when the packet arrives or how you go about it, because it comes as a little packet about what 5 inches by 3, and it looks like dried clay, by the way. It's not crawling around anywhere, is it, Sue? It's it's not like that at all.
No, I mean, when you say you were using on potatoes, were you using them for slug control?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely, because we have little black slugs
by the million.
By the million.
Yeah, right. Well, when I mentioned spray, I didn't mean spray through a sprayer unless you have a very coarse rose. So I'm sorry if that confused you. Usually the recommendation is for a coarse rose, but if you're finding it works for you, what I would do is just take off that fine rose when you've finished and just dunk it into a clear bowl of water or a clear bottle of water and wash it out and see if you get any nematodes. You should be able to see them. If you put it onto a black plastic bag, you should be able to see whether you actually got any left. It may be that your nozzle is fine for what you're doing. But as regards the formulation, different products have different formulations. And when I was talking about ideally for some pests, it's best to use XYZ nematode, but in fact, the nematodes have to go through quite a robust production procedure. And if they can't survive that procedure, then they'll use a nematode that will work. And you can either get that dried powder, or I think what they do a lot nowadays is like a gel, and you put that gel into the water. But as regards live animals, this was one of the things that in the early days caused a lot of problems with Royal Mail and the post office, and then when it was explained to them, they were perfectly fine with it because they're completely harmless. but they're in a, until you start adding water, they're not going to move around or do anything. So maybe when these first started to come out, say 20 years ago, there was a note sent round to the post office, and maybe they need to just reassure people, because the post office or Royal Mail won't take anything, you know, that they know is a live animal. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and move on. Anyone else got any questions? Harry?
Yes. I've tried nematodes 2 successive years with my potatoes, and in each year I've ended up with potatoes full of slug damage. It is expensive stuff at 13-14 pounds a packet. You might as well just go and buy potatoes from Sainsbury's in a sensible world. Is there an optimum time, a best time to be giving treatment during the growing period of the potato? So that you can, I'm sort of in my imagination, I'm assuming that until the potatoes are reasonably big, the slugs really aren't going to be very interested in infesting them. That maybe wait until August or September before you treat. Is there an optimum time to do this economically, or do you just have to take the financial hit?
No, you can. I mentioned about repeating applications, and you're doing that certainly. But the nematodes in the soil will infest other pests, but normally they die out within about 4 weeks or so. So I don't know what your interval is for your spraying. That's the first thing. The optimum time, I mean, you're quite right. The potatoes won't be interesting to the slugs for some time. The little black ones, do they actually, can you trap them on the surface at all, or do they stay down underneath?
Well, they stay down underneath. It's a bit difficult trapping. I have an allotment which is about 4 miles from home, so going out at night and with a torch is not really an option. I've done that at home, but not on the allotment. Just on this, it has occurred to me that I am burying my potatoes a little bit deep. I'm just wondering whether how deep the nematodes will penetrate to catch their prey, or whether they'll only go down a few inches rather than a dozen inches or so.
No, they will penetrate, but what you need to do is to help them along. I don't know which product you're using, but if it's one that's is it a, oh yes, it's the one.
It's the powder one that you buy it online. Yeah.
I think in your case, I think you need to make sure you're watering it well. Presumably the potatoes are in furrows, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So you would need, once the flowering is finished or around flowering time, I would start your applications then, because the tubers will be starting to form. And I would put this first spray on then, or the first application on then, and then another one about a month later. But obviously, if the soil's very, very wet, you don't, I mean, some allotments might hopefully don't get flooded, but you don't want it so wet that your solution is just going to flow off into the distance, as it were. You want to be able to make
not a problem.
Yeah. So I would had 2 applications about 4 weeks apart, but make sure that you really put enough on to reach those tubers. They won't, if you put them in just to keep them at top, they won't move down into the underground. You need to get them down into the underground area where the tubers are.
And speaking from memory, I think my packets say that you've got to use within 6 weeks and keep it in the fridge. Could I divide the pack into 2 and then use one and then come back 4 weeks later?
You could do, but you might have to treat less plants.
Oh yes, yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the rate is important. But yes, there's no reason why you can't split it if you can. But the
Yeah.
rate is important. You know, the whole thing is that they've reared them up into vast numbers, so you stand a greater chance of controlling them.
Okay, well, I'll let someone else ask a question. I'll thank you ever so much, Sue.
Okay.
Somebody else, another question, please.
Oh, there's two.
It was Carol. We'll go. I'll call you in a moment, Carol. Hilary?
Hillary's on mute.
Hilary, are you on mute? You're on mute. Hello?
For a couple of years now, I've had onions rotting from the top. And what you said about rotting from the top made me wonder whether it could be a nematode rather than something else. Is there a known nematode pest of onions?
Yes, there is. The ones I showed you in the bulbs, stem nematode, Dartalangus diptychi, there's actually a race which loves onions. So if you are having rotting from the top and you're not managing to control it with any advice, I would definitely seek out help for that. Now, what you really, do you belong to the RHS?
I'm not an individual member, no.
Right, because I was just thinking what some people do in trying to find a nematode problem is to cut up, I don't know how many onions you have that are affected, but if you cut it up and put it in like a small dish, clear dish of water, if the stem nematodes are there, and you need to do this during the growing season, they will be quite obvious as quite large nematodes. You'll be able to see them with the naked eye. And if you see a lot of them, you've got a problem. If you can't see a quite distinct large nematode, but lots of little tiny ones, then it may be they're just feeding on the rotting material and a different type altogether. So what you've got to find out is whether the rotting's due to nematodes or disease. What I would do is just do that first test of the, but don't take it from the rotting material, take it from just inside the bulb itself, right in the middle, because that's where you'll get the stem nematode more. When you see that dark patch at the top, that's where the nematodes have been. Okay, they just go down into the bulb to survive until the next crop.
I tend not to see any rotting when they're in the ground. It's when they're in storage that they start to rot. I usually dry them off quite thoroughly.
Yes.
Despite that, they're rotting in storage.
Yes, so the nematodes survive quite well in storage. So again, that seems to tie up with the diagnosis. It could be stem nematode. So
Okay.
I would have a go and just cut open one or two and see if you find distinct nematodes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Carol, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hello, Sue. Thanks for a most interesting talk. I'm glad I had my tea before you started. Just a question. I was really interested in the information you gave about the life cycle of the particular pests. Would you be able to recommend a resource just to bone up about the particular life cycles?
Do you mean you want to know the life cycle?
To know the life cycle, so I'm aware of when I'm putting, when would be the appropriate time to use a nematode or other control methods?
Well, the RHS website, I think you don't even have to be a member. I think they do quite a lot of information, or you could just try and Google it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I can't think offhand of. There are a few books available, but I don't know if they're available at the moment. But I think with vine weevil, it'll give you a life cycle, and I don't know what you've got vine weevil problems on, but is it?
I'm just anticipating it.
Oh, you're anticipating. Oh, well, that's good.
Could be embarrassing.
What you need to do really is, if you've got a problem already, go out about July time into the garden, and when it's a full moon, not with a torch.
With my clothes on, I suppose.
Yes. Quite often you can see a lot at dark, and vine weeds are very sensitive to movement and to sudden light. But quite often, if you've got a real problem, they will be, you can sometimes hear them even crawling up plants and going to the tops of the plants. But if you don't want to do that, then I would have a look at your plants, valuable plants, around end of August, September time. When it's difficult these days to give a sort of forecast what the weather's going to be like, but I would dig up a few plants and see if you can see the white grubs.
Okay.
It's best to use the nematodes when those grubs are small, rather than after they've done a lot of damage.
Right.
So I would look around September time. If you've got anything in polytunnels or glass houses, you could have a problem any time of year.
Yeah, yeah.
So as long as, with vine weed, if you just remember that the adults can be active most of the year. If are your crops inside or outside?
Both.
Right. So it can be any time of year you can look inside, and outside I would have a look for the larvae around end of August, September time. And then if you find them, you know that that is the best time to apply a drench.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Anyone got a question? Right, Jane. Jane, would you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
Yes, I'm just doing that. You showed us a picture of potato cyst nematodes.
Yeah.
Would they be big enough to see when you were harvesting them?
Well, you should just be able to see them. They're a bit smaller than a small pinhead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you look too early, you're not going to find the brown cysts. Now, the brown cysts are more easy to see. But on the other hand, if you look at them when they're just forming the cyst, then you won't leave them behind in the soil when you pull up the plant. So an optimum time is about mid-July for pulling up the roots very carefully and having a look. Then it's then only really likely to appear on tubers if you've got a massive infestation. So it's the roots that you want to look at, and the fresh roots, and you should be able to see them. Okay. They'll be turning colour at that time.
July, right? Thank you.
Okay. Someone else? Question, please. Jan. Jan would like to. I'll be with you in a minute, Susan. Jan, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. Hi, Sue.
Hello.
Hello. Really enjoyed that. That was absolutely wonderful. Lots of information there. One thing I did notice from one of your images is that there seems to be a nematode for ants, which I didn't realise. Now, we live on a dry, sandy, acidic hillside, and we have lots and lots of wood ants. Now, I don't mind them in the wooded bit, but they come and make nests in my flower borders as well, and it's almost impossible to get them out of there. Oh, can you recommend a nematode to do that? And would it be a problem, because obviously ants' nests tend to be quite dry?
Yes, but I don't think wood ants are a protected species, are they? I don't think so. If they're
They were introduced to this area, so I don't think they're protected.
No, no. That would be the first thing. But no, I don't think. I think it's another. The way to do it, I would. There is an ant product. I don't know how successful it is, but all these products have to go through an approval procedure. So if they're recommended for ants, they should kill ants. So I'm not that familiar with the label, but you should be able to see the label online. Nemesis do one and read it carefully and see what they say. But I would just, if you can somehow find where the wood ants are coming from, if they
Well,
are.
that's easy. Yeah, they nest.
Yeah, they usually have a big nest, don't they?
Yeah, that's right.
I would just make sure that you drench that with your application. Do that when they're likely to be active, because there may be spells when wood ants aren't so active, and do it when they're running around. You'll probably get a feel for when they're most likely to be active and put your spray on then rather than wait till later in the day when they're not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, early in the season, they all tend to hover around the top of the nest. You can see them from now, really, and they haven't gone off foraging. So if it's not too cold for that particular type of nematode, probably now would be a good time.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's so hard to tell these days with the temperatures. You need to check what temperature is most. I would imagine with a heap of wood ants, you could put a thermometer in or something and see how warm it is. But it's probably going to be quite warm, isn't it? An ant's nest.
I think so. Yes.
So I would perhaps wait a little bit longer before because you'll have a lot more sort of foraging when it warms up a bit more. When you've got, I would wait until next month, I think, before you put it on.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. They only really are a problem where they're right in the middle of a plant or a group of plants, and it's almost impossible to get them out of there without destroying everything else.
Yes,
Thank you.
I think most of the work has been done on Lasius niger, which is the black garden ant. So it would be, I don't know whether they say that on the label, but you might have to be prepared for it not to work because it's not been tried on wood ants. But the principles are the same.
Yeah, I guess I could ring the company and ask them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably the best thing to do. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, please? You were talking about the nematodes that take vegetation. Is anybody doing any work to find nematodes that may target specific weeds? In particular, I'm thinking, of course, of bindweed. Now, if there was a nematode that would take out bindweed, I would invest in that company and they would rocket away from Elon Musk at a huge rate.
Yes, no, I've not heard of anything like that, I'm afraid.
Pity. Have to carry on with digging.
I think you'll have to keep on digging. Yes, I don't know of any. I think if you get these root knot nematodes, most of them are going to be multi polyphagous. They'll eat other things, so you might introduce them and then get them on some of your crops or something. So you don't want to do that.
No, I'd be weeping. Well, thank you. But I too are finding your talk very, very interesting, I have to say.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm in Hayleyport.
Susan, did you have a question?
I just wondered if in tackling the slug problem, is that an issue for birds? If the birds then eat the slugs, please.
Well, most of the slugs that have died will be underground, and birds would have to dig for them. If they did dig them up, then it wouldn't harm the birds at all. They're not hosts for the nematodes, so That's what makes them so brilliant. You know, they're not going to harm other wildlife, and they're part of the native fauna anyway.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating talk. Not a topic I was familiar with at all, so
Well,
really
not
interesting.
many people are. Not many people are.
Okay, another question, please. Chris.
I had a go with the Nemaslug stuff last year. I'm not a vegetable gardener, and I was trying to tackle the potential slug problem of my hostas, like everybody does. And I assumed that the right time to start treatment was before the leaves started emerging, unfolding. And I think I'd noticed the precautions about temperatures, the general temperature at the time. And so I didn't do it too early from that point of view. But I did wonder if, because I was trying to get the slugs with the nematodes before the leaves emerged, that when they were just the little pointy buds coming through the soil, whether I'd done it too early, because I think I was singularly unsuccessful.
Yeah. Well, quite possibly so. I mean, we have hostas in our garden, and I think the problem last year was that, well, not from our point of view, but it was very dry, wasn't it, for long spells? So first of all, the slugs wouldn't be that active. In fact, we had such a good crop of hostas, but the nematodes wouldn't work either if it was very dry on the soils. So my inclination would be to watch the weather rather than the hostas. And it may be that, I don't know about you, but when did you notice your first damage? Was it sometime after the hostas had emerged?
Yes, I think they were all right initially.
Yes.
And then I gave up as you know how you do the repeat watering of the nematodes, and I think
the temperature is very, very important.
Yes.
Rather than the stage that the plant is at.
Right.
So
but if you were to water onto leaves, would it?
If you water onto leaves, you've got to wash them off, because they've got to go into the soil.
Yes.
If you stay on the leaves, they're just going to dry up and they won't persist long enough in order to go into the slugs. So you need to put them on. I would put them on, say, at dusk if it's a nice, warm, moist. If you find it's very dry like it was last year, let the hostas grow a bit and then water the soil before.
Around, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I knew I'd done something wrong. I'm encouraged to try again.
Yes, yes, I would not give up.
Any more questions? Next question, please. Right, Diane.
It's not really a question. I'd just like to say thank you, Sue, for letting us know that nematodes that are used are already here. And so we're not adding something that we shouldn't be adding to the soils. It's quite reassuring. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
No, that's fine. I mean, there was a lot of controversy as these were being developed and brought onto the market, well, some 20 odd years ago. And this was very important. You know, a lot of effort was put in to make sure that any strains used were present in this country. Yeah. So they all go through an approval process.
Okay. Next question, please. No more? Right. I'd like to ask.
Oh, there you are.
All right. Sorry.
Can I have one more?
Just a quickie, Dave, because I've got one. I'm going to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm going to break down if I don't get an answer to it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to know how the nematodes find their prey. Is it just random? You know, so do they wait for a slug to come past them, or do they actively go after them, because if you're going to wait, it could be that a lot of them never ever see a slug. You know, they just live and die.
Yeah. Well, it's actually quite a complex question, but to start at the basics, you have those nematodes, mostly the Steinonema type, which are sedentary. They're ambushers. Okay, they ambush the prey, so it will wait until the pest is in with light, because any pest will produce odors of one sort or another, and then ambush it. That's why Steinonemas are normally used for mobile pests.
I did say that. Yeah.
But for mobile pests, the heterodicted nematodes that are used in other products are known as cruisers.
Oh yes,
they cruise around looking for the pests.
Yeah.
But there's a limit. You know, the nematodes are only very, very tiny.
Yeah.
So they're not going to cruise vast distances in your soil. But they do, there's research going on all the time. And besides homing in on what odors might be in the soil, they've recently found, for example, that those nematodes that just sit there and wait to ambush, actually, if they happen to touch an insect, that will somehow activate them and reinvigorate them, and they will go searching because they think, oh, there must be some around.
Yeah.
So it's a variety of cues, really.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any more?
Can I ask a quick question, please?
Okay, Kate.
Yeah. Do they oh dear, sorry. Do they occur naturally in the soil? Have we all got some, or do different soils have different amounts of them? Can you do something in the way you garden or add to the soil to make sure that you're actually encouraging the good ones, if you like?
Yes, they're naturally occurring in the soil. All soils will have them, except the heavier soils, the clayer soils, because they won't be so easy for the nematodes to move around. So healthy soils generally have a lot of nematodes in, because they're all recyclers, they're all a lot of predators and parasites, for example, just like you might get a range of those types in insects. So just by maintaining a healthy soil, putting compost on, but not things like chicken manure tends to be very acidic if you're not careful. So not too much chicken manure, because that will degrade a lot of the nematode populations. But they will bounce back, and of course not use a lot of pesticides. That will help as well. So yes, they're there, but you're never going to be able to breed them up in the quantities you get in the products in order to help you control the slug.
Right.
Just make it easy for them to be able to do a little bit. But that might not be good enough from your point of view.
For the control point of view. All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Any biological control is never 100% effective. No chemical control is ever 100% effective. And you always need other measures, like, for example, with the vine weevil, I said going out at night and collecting the adults. Having a few chickens or hedgehogs, you know, hedgehogs are your friend, for example. So the culmination of a lot of measures is going to get you control of your pests rather than just one.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Right, can I ask one, please? I was enjoying your talk, but sometimes struggling to keep up. And then you said something which made my blood run cold. You mentioned box tree caterpillars. Now, I have, perhaps my wife would say, an unhealthy relationship with box. I've got lots of it. I truly impress it. We spent the last 6 years, I think, fighting and probably winning against box blight. Now, tell me, please, is there, if we get the box moth, is there a nematode that will combat it?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Just say it's not with antibiotic control. It's not going to be 100% effective, but there is one on the market for box tree caterpillar.
And you just spray it onto, because these are mature box hedges and all kinds of things like that. You just spray it onto the foliage itself.
Well, again, I would look at the label as to the timing, because you don't want it if it's going to create a lot of webbing or curly leaves or anything like that. You want to get it early. So you need to keep a watch out for the pest, and then look like one of your other members was going to do, look on the internet and read the label for what it recommends.
Well, see, the problem is that when we were growing hedges, because we'd seen so many hedges, box hedges look thin and weedy, we grew each time about 3 plants deep. So it's awfully difficult to get to the roots of the things like that. So would, in fact, spraying the foliage be adequate?
Oh, well, yes, the box tree formulation is for spraying on leaves.
Ah, good.
Because the pest won't go, the pest is going to be active. I'm not familiar, I must admit, with the box tree caterpillar formulation, but it is, I know they do it because I've seen the adverts online. But I don't think, if I'm right in saying, that you would spray the soil, you would spray the foliage.
Right.
And so make sure if it's thick that you spray it enough that you've got
Drench it.
those deep points.
I'm not aware that we have it in this area, but it is in the south of England. And I noticed the garden centres were selling box caterpillar traps already. So there's obviously thinking it'll be coming around this area. Yeah. Just one other thing. I always thought nematodes were good guys, but obviously with the plant parasite ones, there are some baddies. If you find it in, and I noticed some of our ferns might just have it, presumably you don't compost the remnants, you have to burn them.
Yes. Yes. I wouldn't put infested stuff onto the compost. No. A lot of the ones that occur in ferns will stay active for quite a few weeks. But if you've got a good compost, it should be quite hot in the middle. Yes. I would have thought that would kill them over time if you left them in there. If you left them in there, say, for 6 months or a year, I would think that would be okay. But generally speaking, you wouldn't put infested stuff onto a compost.
Right. Thank you.
I've got a quick one. Somebody else has.
Andrea has a question. It's another question.
Just a comment really, rather than a question. When I used nematodes, and that was for several years, and I think it started, I was using them about 18 years ago when there was a lot of discussion about whether we should or not. But once they went from £11 to 13, and by the sound of it, they're now £14 a go, that used to cover for me 3 10-foot rows of potatoes, plus a bit spread around 1 or 2 other things. And I couldn't justify paying, £28 to spray my potatoes. And so in the last 5 years, I would say, I've not used them, but I plant my seed potatoes, starting with my very, very first early ones, under cover for 3 weeks. And I aim to have dug them up by early August, and be starting on my only other variety that I use now, and that is Charlotte. And it's because they're very hard skinned and very waxy. And we had them still in the soil at the, what was it, Jeff? First week of December. I dug my last Charlotte potatoes up. I cut the tops off, but left a whole row in the ground, and they were clean as a whistle.
Yes, I mean, you've hit across a very important point, that a lot of plants can be, if you like, resistant to pests because of a particular feature. And those potatoes that you've mentioned, it's the same with, I don't know if it's the same with slugs, but certainly with nematodes. After a certain stage, the tubers will grow that skin and the nematodes can't get in. So it must be, they must have a nice skin. So that may be the thing to concentrate on, you know, and then the slugs won't be able to eat them so much. Yeah,
because we have a huge problem with these small black ones. I mean, where I would call it infested with them actually, but it doesn't seem to be affecting the root crops.
No,
I'm quite pleased about that.
Yes, oh, that's good. No, it's good. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? Nope. Right.
Wow.
Sue, I can only thank you for a fascinating talk.
I'm sorry if I went too quickly, but
No,
I wanted to get
well,
in.
Made up for it.
Andrea has been taking plenty of notes. We'll perhaps publish them. I mean, it's nice to have a speaker. Sometimes I felt, well, I was ahead of the speaker. Tell me something I don't know. But with you, I was desperately trying to keep up. And thank you. It was fascinating. Obviously, you've caught the attention of the group very much like that. I was to take on board a lot of the things you said. Thank you again. And thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yes, very good.
Over to you, Catherine.
Okay, right. I just need to end the meeting then. Thank you very much, Sue. Technology worked.
I saw I've got a little red spot that says recording. Have you recorded?
Oh yes, I bet that's a good point.
Because